Welcome to another episode of your Hope-Filled Perspective, where our goal is to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and we have a special treat this week because this week I'm going to be interviewing my teenager, Bryce, because we are dealing with anxiety in the nation and in the world, especially as it relates to the coronavirus. And so I really wanted to address how to deal with anxiety in our kids, our teenagers. So I've invited Bryce to share his perspective. Thanks for joining me on the show this week, Bryce.
Of course.
You know, Bryce, we have been dealing with the coronavirus, which has disrupted everybody's life. I'm curious, Bryce. I know how your dad and I have experienced this crisis and how it's impacted us, but I'm curious, how has this coronavirus negatively impacted you and your friends?
Well, a lot of what has happened to me and a lot of my peers really has to do with school and family. Because at school, everything is set. We have periods that we go to every single day, and we learn in those blocks of periods. But now that schools are closed across the country, we don't have that time set aside. And so we don't know if school is going to open back up and if it's just going to be a long spring break, or there's the possibility that school remains closed until the end of the semester. And so, with that being said, we're trying to figure out how to possibly do school online, how to turn in projects that were um, notified to us or told to us before the break, and how to turn those in, and just trying to remain in communication with each other and with our teachers.
And communication is a big issue, both with respect to what you still need to be navigating for daily life, but communication is a big issue globally because things are changing with this pandemic every day. So communication is key, but not always readily available. Is that a fair statement?
Very much so. I've personally tried to get in contact with a few of my teachers, and I wasn't able to get an instant response, which made it difficult to complete and turn in some assignments just because there wasn't clarification. And that relates to both school, and that can even relate to the president, because if he's unable to instantly communicate something to the public, there might be chaos even more than there already is.
Is there a flip side to this coronavirus? You mentioned some of the negative that has happened, putting your life in chaos, not knowing how to navigate the educational system, not knowing what's going to change in terms of expectations on you and your peers. But is there a positive side to this? Because scripture says what the enemy intended for harm, God will use for good. Have you seen any positives come out of this?
Oh, absolutely. We've been able to spend more time together with family and just kind of relax a little bit. I know with the negatives, I mentioned family and school, but even with the havoc that's kind of going on with unsure school schedules, there is still a positive with that, because with the assignments we have more time to do it, because once we're done with one class, we can instantly move to the other, and we don't have to wait for the bell to ring again just to be able to start working again. And so a lot more productive, a lot more able to get done, and just more time with family.
Your dad and I made mention of something to you earlier today, and that is when this all first started, there was a palpable experience of wondering what's going to happen and how are we going to navigate. And you even had another level of
Yep.
complication. What was that?
So just a few days before we were originally supposed to go back to school, we had already been notified that school was going to be pushed back another 2 weeks But on Saturday, I had my phone not work,
It
and
died.
it just bricked. And when we went to get it fixed, the person who was fixing it said, "Oh yeah, this is a common issue." They went to the back, they came back out and said, "We cannot fix this. Something's wrong with it past what we are able to do." And so we've already mentioned how communication is really important in a time like this. And so being limited past just text, past any other form of communication, I was now limited to only being able to receive any information strictly from email.
And what kind of emotional ramifications did that have on you when all of a sudden your window to the world was basically closed?
Well, it passed the initial, "Oh no, my phone's gone. How can I get in communication?" After that, it was actually kind of calm because I didn't have constant notifications saying, "Hey, we should jump on a Zoom call together. Hey, do y'all want to FaceTime? Hey, let's meet up." After those notifications were gone, I was able to just kind of sit back and do more work without having to worry about distractions. And so that actually kind of helped.
And that was what your dad and I mentioned to you earlier today. That was after the initial shock and disappointment of losing the capability of using your phone to contact your peers and others. After you adjusted to the idea that it's gone, it can't be fixed, you have seemed so much more peaceful. And I have felt more at peace, strangely, since being quarantined. And I wonder if that is a lesson for us. You know, social media and this technology age have imposed expectations on us that we respond in a moment's notice. I mean, if you text somebody and they don't respond in 5 or 10 minutes, don't you kind of feel like, come on, what's taking you so long? I need an answer.
Mhm.
But this has brought us back to kind of the pre-technology age to some degree, where the really important things are really more important now.
Yep.
This would be an appropriate time for us to take a real quick commercial break. But listeners, stay tuned because Bryce is offering a perspective that we can only get from our youth or our children of how are they navigating anxiety in real world situations. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope Filled Perspective, where today I'm talking with my son, Bryce, who's a teenager, and I'm discussing with him how is the current crisis, the coronavirus, affecting his generation. And if it's not the coronavirus, there will be another trial or difficulty that we will experience. But let's see what lessons we can take from this particular situation. Bryce, since the news of the coronavirus has really spread and limitations are being imposed. I mean, first we went from you can't gather in groups of more than 100 to you can't gather in groups of more than 50 to you can't gather in groups of more than 10, and now they're pretty much saying stay home. What emotions has it produced in you and your peers?
Well, it kind of depends on the situation. With family, it's a lot more peaceful. We get to spend more time together. We can play cards or board games. But with school, there's still a lot unknown. There's constant updates for AP tests from College Board and just general assignments. And so everyone's just kind of all over the place, not really sure where to go in each direction.
So there's a lack of structure and perhaps a lack of guidance,
Mhm.
and there are still many unknowns. So is that bringing about any worry or fear or anxiety amongst your generation?
Absolutely. Already, school um, is a heavy thing to keep up with.
It's
In
stressful
it is,
in the
and
best of times.
yes, just in general. But now with the lack of communication, uncertainty about where it's going to go, it certainly has led to a lot more anxiety about what do we do right now in this moment.
How are you seeing your peers respond to that? Is there a panic? Is there a lot of what ifs? Is there increased irritability or agitation? What are you noticing that would give you an indication that there's underlying worry or anxiety?
Well, before my phone broke, I actually got a text from one of my friends saying, "I want to go back to school. I want to get stuff done." And so people are really wanting structure. They're wanting to go back to pretty much a return to normalcy. And so um, people are trying to gather in small groups that are in the same classes to try and review material. People are very often checking their emails to figure out what's the latest update about what's happening in this class or this class. And so people are a lot more, I guess, aware of what's going on.
Would
But
you say hyper aware?
possibly, yeah. Um, I know that one of my teachers posted something on Google Classroom, which is an application that we use, and I read the email within a minute of her sending it. And so I was checking my email constantly. So I would definitely say, yeah, hyper aware.
For information, for guidance, for structure, for answers.
Hmm.
I'm also wondering, because I'm familiar with teenagers, if this lack of structure, this not being able to return to the physical classroom, is that having an impact, do you think, on your generation getting adequate rest or staying in a structured sleep wake cycle? Because this all started off for you when we were on spring break.
Hmm.
And so as parents, we expected when you go to bed, it's going to be a little bit different on spring break. When you get up, it's different because you're not having to be at 6 a.m. track practice. But as this goes on, have you continued to see that without having that structure, it's impacting things like sleep or appetite or energy levels?
Oh, yes. All extracurriculars have been canceled. So athletes make up a very large portion of the student body. And so for all spring UIL competitions to be canceled is a heavy impact. And so some people are still trying to train on their own, while others are throwing in the towel saying, "It was my senior year. That was, I didn't know it, but that was my last practice. That was my
Mhm.
last meet."
And what kind of emotions are you sensing is coming when they're realizing that?
But really a lot of sadness because a lot of people were expecting, I'll be able to go to district. I'll be
Mhm.
able to go to state. I'll be able to possibly even go to nationals.
They were looking forward to prom probably, and
Hmm.
that's in question.
Oh yeah, I know several schools that have even canceled their prom.
And we know of several colleges that have canceled their graduations for their
Hmm.
seniors, which is not just a canceling of that ceremony, but it means a lot of the seniors are leaving campus and going home now, and their friends aren't getting to spend the next 6 weeks that they thought they were going to have together.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, even their social world is being torn apart.
Hmm. And it's not just athletics and it's not just seniors, but fine arts such as band are. It's really hard to practice band when you're not in a group because it's not just one instrument, it's a multitude of instruments all playing together. And so it's very hard to practice when you're all quarantined in your own houses. And with art, many of the art kids are also feeling that they can't get any advisory with their teachers because it's very hard to properly send a piece of artwork and have it be properly and thoroughly analyzed over the internet. And so every single person in the student body is feeling it in some way or another.
And that's not just feeling it academically, but it's also feeling what their family is going through. I imagine a lot of families are in the same boat we are, that meals are much different. It's
Mm-hmm.
piecing together whatever you can until you can get more food at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So even right down to the dinner time is being affected. I'm curious, how are you combating the temptation to succumb to worry, fear, and anxiety in a time where your generation is experiencing the first worldwide crisis
Mm-hmm.
since you've been born, really, because you don't remember 9/11, and that impacted, that shook the
Mm-hmm.
world. So how are you combating that temptation?
Well, surprisingly, even though there's more time to get stuff done, but along with more things to do, I've actually been a lot more on point with reading my Bible. I have a chronological Bible that I've been going through, and I've been a lot more up to date. I've been able to read ahead even a little. And so just being able to get in God's Word and learn more about Him, this has actually given me more time to do so, even though initial thought would suggest that I'd have less.
I think another thing, in addition to being more vigilant and focused on your Bible reading, that I've noticed is you've been playing praise and worship music. Even when we do things together as a family, like the other night, we were enjoying family time and you were playing your praise and worship music, and we just all sat around and we were humming along and singing along. I tend to think it was a joyful noise as opposed to music, but the Lord appreciates the joyful noise.
Hmm.
So that's another way you're keeping worship and praise and his word in the forefront of your mind. What are you learning through this about not looking too far into the future? Because I think that's a component for dealing with anxiety as well.
Absolutely. Um, we've mentioned structure several times already, but for people in high school, nearly everybody in high school has had at least one AP class or advanced class. And so currently, everybody in the entire US who is in an AP class is waiting from a message from College Board saying, hey, this is what's going to happen with the tests. Because we're worried about AP credit in college. And so we're all just kind of waiting to figure out what's going to happen. And so that's forced us to kind of take a step back and go day by day by day and just work on what we can. And I forgot where it is in the Bible, but I think it's Matthew. But it says, "Go, don't worry about tomorrow. It has enough worries
Of its own.
of its own." Yeah, and so it's not our. It's we're not even supposed to go a week, a month, a year ahead. We're supposed to go day by day, and it's even though a lot of us really want to, it's forcing us to take a step back and just do what we can in the hour that we're in.
You mentioned that verse in Matthew where Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow holds enough worries of its own, which is true. We can even expand that a little bit and say, don't worry about how you're going to get through this coronavirus. Don't worry about what's next, because after the coronavirus, we'll have other difficulties that we encounter. But I'm curious if there are any other verses that have come to your mind for helping you to tackle worry, fear, and anxiety.
Um, Cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you, is one that's kind of been jumping around a little bit. And it's very true. We've already mentioned that we're not supposed to go a day ahead. That's God's burden. And so we are supposed to step back and just trust in him and give him all our issues that we cannot handle on our own. And so that's one that really has been bouncing around a lot.
And this is a huge issue that clearly We can't control the coronavirus, but we can give him our worries and concerns about our health, about groceries, about toilet paper. I mean, no care and concern is too small or too great for God, which is something I love. When he says cast it all, he means the big ones and the small ones. Let's take a real quick commercial break, and then we'll come back and wrap this up because I want to hear from you what thoughts you have for others, your generation as well as mine, who might be struggling with worry, fear, and anxiety right now. We will be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where today we are talking with my son, Bryce, really looking deeper into what are the burdens, what are the worries, fears, and anxieties that are affecting our children, our teenagers right now. As adults dealing with the coronavirus or any other trial, we have a certain amount of life experience, but even that life experience doesn't prepare us for such significant pandemics as the coronavirus. And our children certainly aren't prepared. But what we have talked about on your Hope-Filled Perspective a couple of recent episodes is the fact that our children are now experiencing their first major worldwide crisis. And what we teach them during this time will influence how they face future crises. Bryce, one thing that I always like to ask my guests is, what can we do practically to help others who might be experiencing, in this case, worry, fear, and anxiety? What suggestions do you have that anybody listening could do, especially to help teens, but it could be anybody who's struggling with anxiety in this situation?
Well, there are a lot of things that people just don't really think of. Grandparents or parents in nursing homes, a lot of nursing homes are under complete lockdown right now. So
Yeah,
even if you can't visit them, try and call them and get in touch with them and maybe just call them once a day.
because they're lonely.
Yeah. So just call them, even for 5 minutes a day, just to say, hey, how are you? Or if there's a small group of people that you know are probably dealing with it, maybe send a text a day of just encouragement or maybe a Bible verse and just send that to them to try and help them understand that this isn't going to be forever. It might be a while, it might take some time, but God still holds you in his hand.
And that's a way of maintaining contact, even though you can't have physical contact.
Yep.
What about your generation is in the technology age? We didn't have cell phones when I was your age. So when we had the blizzard, we were out of luck. There was no getting together and there was no calling on our cell phone. But that can be an advantage. How can we use technology to help others who are struggling with worry, fear, and anxiety, or maybe the social isolation that this virus has caused us to endure?
Well, maybe try starting an online Bible study. And if you're not able to meet in person, online is always an option. If your youth group or just your church in general is closed, tune into the live show. A lot of churches have started posting live videos on YouTube of the sermons that would normally be on the weekend. And just try and get into the Word with other people over a Zoom call or FaceTime or just
Or Skype.
or Skype. And so just try and get in the Word and still try and have fun with people, even if they're not sitting right next to you.
I think one thing that we should touch on is the fact that we usually cannot control the trials or the crises that we experience, but we can control our response to them. And I think right now I'm hearing a lot of people saying, I have to stay home, or I have to take care of my kids all day when they're usually at school, or um, things like that. But if we could just make a small shift in perspective, and instead of looking at it as I have to, how about I get to? That's how I've been looking at this situation as far as our family goes. I get to spend more time with you and your dad. We've enjoyed a lot more family time that hasn't been so stressed out by all the normal activities because we can't do the normal activities. But that's been beneficial because I get to spend time with you instead of I have to, whatever, X, Y, and Z, I get to. You know that I always wrap up my shows asking my guest to share a hope filled perspective about the topic of the day. Today, we're talking about worry, fear, and anxiety, especially as it relates to our kids or our teenagers. So I'm curious, with respect to that, what hope filled perspective would you want to offer?
Well, something that you say all the time is that this didn't take God by surprise. He knew it was going to happen, and He holds each and every single person in His hand. So He knows what's going to happen, and nothing that we do can deviate from His plan for you.
That's true.
And so, you going to buy 6 things of toilet paper at the grocery store, that doesn't do anything to deviate from God's plan for you. And so just trusting in God and getting into His Word consistently throughout this and past this can really open up minds and just help people just sit down and not have to worry.
You mentioned that this didn't take God by surprise, and you're right. I say that a lot. The other piece that I would add to that, it goes right along with my life verse, which you know is Jeremiah 29:11. And it's not just that this didn't take God by surprise, but we don't know the future. But in Jeremiah 29:11, it says that God does know our future, and His plans for us are to prosper us and not to harm us, for a future, a future. He has a future and a hope. And I think if we can remember that, first, it didn't take Him by surprise, but second of all, He already knows the future. He knows how He's going to get us through this, even though we don't. We can maintain our hope in Him by trusting that He will be true to His words. I'm so appreciative that you came onto the program today to share a different perspective from what you and your peers are dealing with. Is there anything else that has come to mind that you want to share that you think would be important for us to mention before we close out this episode?
The importance of spending time with family. This is a time that doesn't come along often. And as you said, taking it as I can instead of I have to can allow you to enjoy this time with your family instead of seeing it as a time of unstructured rambling. Inconvenience, yes.
Yeah, I like that. As you near your senior year and you've already started looking at colleges and starting college applications, this time that we've had together, I've had the opportunity to think through, he's going out to college pretty soon. Like, I don't know how many more opportunities we will get this much concentrated time together. And so for that, thank you, coronavirus. I'm grateful. As usual, this has been your hope-filled perspective with Dr. Michelle Bengtson and my son, Bryce Bengtson. We hope that this has been encouraging to you, insightful to you, and given you some thoughts to consider this week. Until next time, make it a hope-filled week.